kind of added another word that could, in addition to national implications for my protocol and therapy. Within the last year, it's actually taken on some international implications as well, in terms of additional forms of cancer and as well as additional countries around the world. We've extended from the United States into Europe and the Middle East. And so it begins with the non-enzymatic methylation of the nucleotide cytidine by the intracellular methylator S-adenosylmethionine, also known as SAM, as well as methylcobalamin, which is really the active form of vitamin B12. And basically the cytidine gets methylated first to 5-methylcytidine, and then there occurs a spontaneous deamination, right, where the amino group is removed and it forms the nucleotide thymidine. And this can occur in DNA at physiologic pH and temperature, right? pH of 7.4, temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. And it's really been known since the early 1980s about this non-enzymatic methylation of DNA. And it's been implicated in, some, cytidine to thymidine point mutagenic cancers. Excuse me. And cancers in general all display a global hypomethylation, where there is an undermethylation. Some areas are overmethylated, others are undermethylated, but by and large, most are actually undermethylated. And in the case of CLL, which I've been focusing on, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, there is a hypomethylation of promoter regions in the cells. And the idea occurred to us, well, at first our initial research showed that this non-enzymatic methylation occurs in RNA as well as DNA. But while we were conducting the research, it occurred to us that the over-the-counter supplement known as SAMe, which is S-adenosylmethionine, as well as either the methylcobalamin precursor cyanocobalamin, again B12, could possibly still play a role, right, as a potential adjunct therapy in certain cancers, particularly those that are being treated with alkylating chemotherapeutic agents, typically used in CLL, right, in chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Much in the same way that folic acid is used as a rescue adjunct therapy in using anti-folate chemotherapeutic agents, right, for various other cancers. We're supposed to start clinical trials actually in late 2019, and of course the pandemic hit, and the trials were really put on hold indefinitely. But we went ahead and began it with a case study using a methylation protocol, right, that we had come up with. And as I said, and kind of snowballed. It seems to be kind of growing each year, and I'll show you some of the data on that, well, aside from 2020, but it seems to have been growing since 2018, 2019, more so when we first advanced the idea for this protocol. And as I said, it's gone national here in the US, and really over the last year or so, thanks to conferences like these, where I've been able to network with other colleagues such as yourselves, that they've been able to institute some of these protocols in Europe and the Middle East as well. So we're getting extremely positive results. Quick review again of these methylating agents. Here is the SAM or SAMe, the S-adenosylmethionine. It is the primary methylator in all living organisms, including viruses. So everything that requires methylation just about in our bodies uses SAMe, and to a lesser extent, cobalamin, right, B12. And again, the value of these methylators can't be, understated. The SAMe is great. The cobalamin or B12 is excellent, as is folic acid. But as I said, I tend to shy away from it with antifolate chemotherapy. But in some of these, as we'll see, some of these other cancers that don't use antifolate agents, actually the folic acid has been employed successfully as well. And all of them are involved in DNA and RNA synthesis. They all address this hypomethylation that we see with cancers, with various cancers. They're actually antiviral in their nature as well, particularly in the area of gene silencing, which is probably the case in the CLL, right, because it's in the promoter region. But these methylators can also be involved in gene activation also. So there is a potential for anti-SARS-CoV-2 activity, right, COVID-19. And really, since this time, since the pandemic began, I've noticed an uptick in research on particularly folic acid. It's actually been seen to, or been shown to inhibit that the, famous or perhaps infamous furin proteins, the enzymes, as far as their cleavage, and activating the COVID-19, the spike proteins. And so I keep seeing, more and more research being done, particularly on the folic acid. Now, this antiviral activity may also complement its mechanism in cancer. Both human T-cell lymphotropic virus type 1, which is HTLV1, as well as Epstein-Barr virus, EBV, have also been implicated in the progression of chronic lymphocytic leukemia. So the protocol we came up with is, our first line would be the SAMe, 400 milligrams daily, okay, by mouth. The only restriction is if the patient is taking a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or SSRI, antidepressant, and up to doses of 10 milligrams a day, they can still tolerate the SAMe. When it gets above that, however, then we would move to the second line. And this would be the cobalamin, right, as cyanocobalamin B12, in a high dose or higher dose of 1,000 micrograms sublingually or orally daily. Now, for some reason, that can't be tolerated. And as I said, and some clinicians have gone on to the third line quite successfully as well, which would be the folic acid, right, or folate, typically in doses of 800 to 1,000 micrograms by mouth daily. Again, not recommended in any chemotherapy therapies that use antifolates unless it's used as a rescue medication. So our really the first individual to sign up for the study became one of the only ones, again, because of the start of the pandemic. So we just started following her as a case study. She was completely in agreement with that and fine with that. In late 2019, she's a Caucasian female diagnosed with CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia. And as her chemotherapy and radiation regimen, she was administered RTC, which is radiation therapy plus chemotherapy. Chemo drugs included an alkylating agent, bendamustine, the brand name Trianda, as well as a monoclonal antibody, okay, Rituxan. But the presence of the alkylating agent made her a very, prime candidate. It really, we kind of have the feeling that most cancer patients are candidates for this therapy. But since we were at first focusing on alkylating agents, she was a prime candidate. She was also administered packed red blood cells, right, or PRBCs, and we started administering to her the SAMe at 400 micrograms daily, right, immediately post chemo. And this regimen, the RTC, therapy is actually kind of notorious for having side effects in their patients. Typically alopecia, right? The loss of hair, lots of nausea and vomiting. And this patient, and we were attributing it to the presence of the SAMe. She actually tolerated the radiation and chemo extremely well. She was negative for alopecia, right? I don't think she lost a strand of hair, and did have some minimal nausea and vomiting. We took a look at her blood count, right? Her CBC, and we see the white blood cells were in the normal range, as were the red blood cells, but her MCV, her mean corpuscular volume, was a little on the high side, and her MCHC, the mean corpuscular hemoglobin concentration, was a little bit on the low side. The platelets kind of fell in the middle, little toward the low side, but they seemed to be, this was actually due to the fact she was already in, kind of full-blown CLL by the time she realized it, and the therapy was starting to be administered. And in fact, we kind of didn't understand how she was able to even bring herself into the ER initially, because she was that far gone. She was that bad off. I think a lot of, part of it, I'm sure, stems from her, her personal, attitude and whatnot, but also, as I said, we kind of initiated, the therapy right away, and it really seemed to help. Now, because of the lockdowns, she was in the state of Virginia in the US. So her next checkup really wasn't until March of 2020, where she was still doing very well physically. Minimal side effects, still alopecia negative, right? Still had a full head of hair. Now completely negative for nausea and vomiting as well. However, she did begin experience some anxiety and depression, most likely due to the lockdowns of COVID-19 at the time. And so her SSRI that she was on, right, which is a escitalopram, brand name Lexapro, was increased from the 10 milligrams that we said was tolerable and okay to take with the SAMe, but they upped it to 20 milligrams. So we had to DC or discontinue the SAMe and switch her over to the cobalamin, okay, to the B12 as thiodocobalamin, again, 1,000 micrograms sublingually daily, right under the tongue. So it does illustrate really the only main limitation to using SAMe. SAMe is kind of the preferred agent here, but again, we've seen success, a lot of success in this, particularly in this patient, with B12 as well. And the reports I'm getting, lots of success, with folic acid also. So in April of 2020, almost into May, end of April in 2020, she had another checkup, blood work was done, and we see, right, everything really fell within the normal range at that point. White blood cell count was decreased by a statistically significant 6%. The red blood cell decreased, by 0.5%, which really wasn't statistically significant, as was her MCV, right, decreased by 3%, but it did bring it back into the normal range. Same with her MCHC. It increased by a little under 1%, not statistically significant, but brought into the normal range. Interestingly, her platelets decreased by a very statistically significant 28%. And again, she felt fine. And this statistically significant reduction in the white blood cell count, but more so particularly the platelet counts, reduces the risk of thromboses, right, and emboli, blood clots, which, as we know now, are a significant factor. And even that was one of the first, really bad things seen with COVID-19 were the thromboses, right, the emboli, the blood clots, and particularly in sedentary COVID-19 patients. not only was it affecting older patients, but even the younger patients, this is what was getting them, okay, were the blood clots. And so, again, we're going back to the possibility of this being a therapy for COVID-19 as well, in addition to these various cancers. But we did see normalization, as I said, of her pertinent lab values. The methylation therapy attenuated her post-chemo side effects, very well tolerated. So at that point, right, we declared our outcomes met, right, which improved outcomes was our case study goal. And at that point, we declared it, a success, but we wanted to keep following her. And again, in actually almost a year later was her next checkup. Again, her CBC values listed here, all in the normal range, right? She had zero signs of any, relapse, no symptoms, and so much so that her oncologist only scheduled her for 2 more follow-ups at that point in time, contingent on the remission continuing. And it kind of goes, I apologize for going out of sequence here. She actually broke her foot, 2 metatarsal bones in her right foot in December of 2020. And so she underwent a period of convalescence and recovery for a few months until April of 2020. But she after that point, right, here we are in April of 2020, she went back to light duty work at that time, only experiencing mild pain and discomfort, right, with her broken foot. But again, we still feel the utility and success of the protocol has been more than demonstrated. So in October, finally, of 2020, she returned to full-time employment, continues to until today, employed full-time, and has discontinued the protocol. It was right about March of this year, in 2022, that she did discontinue the protocol. But she still remains in full remission. It's been over 2 years since she was first diagnosed with CLL. Her oncologist is extremely happy. She, of course, is very, extremely happy. Her labs, bear it all out. And again, all her lab values have remained normal as of March of this year. Oh, I apologize. And we started looking around. As I said, the clinical trials still weren't an option at that point, but we noticed that word kind of started getting out about the protocol, and it started actually back in August, late July, early August of 2019, right, with the publication of our first paper on the subject, detailing, as I said, that non-enzymatic methylation of RNA that was really never explored. Even though we knew about it in DNA since the 1980s, but no one ever explored it in RNA. We showed it to also be the case in RNA, and again suggested this protocol. And at that point, and then also our group published a book on the subject as well. Actually, all of our research leading up to the protocol at that point. And when we took a look at how it was being implemented around the country in the US, we saw this huge spike. It's just, as you see, a big uptick in clinicians using this protocol, actually quite successfully. We took it down to kind of a narrow range. We looked at the patients who were in the range of our case study patients, right? Females, 54 years of age, plus or minus 5 years, taking the same chemo regimen, right? The bendamustine, Rituxan, radiation, and again, the SAMe, in this case, our first line. And took a look at those and see here, right, the number of reports spiked. Now, of course, they dropped off in 2020. And because of the various areas in the country some come out of lockdown sooner, some don't, right? Some go back. And so the data for 2021 has been a little difficult to get together, but we're in the process of getting that data together as well. But we anticipate it's probably going to be looking good also. Now, we also took a look at the second line, okay, which is what she was undergoing, and a big drop in the number of patients who were implementing, or who had been implemented on this by their clinicians. But again, we see this big spike, right, in 2019 upon the proposal of this protocol, and again a drop off in 2020, due to the pandemic, and we're still again trying to collate the results from 2021. When we looked at the folic acid, the use of the folic acid, we saw kind of an interesting, weird pattern. It's been used in the past, and then really dropped off. We suggested it again, again as a third line agent in our protocol, and even it spiked as well. And even as we see in 2020, use of it in cancers was being used, was being implemented there. But as I said, research has also been being done as far as testing folic acid against COVID as well. Now, attending a conference last year and networking with some individuals, right, over in Europe and in the Middle East, we started, they're the ones who actually suggested, well, other cancers, right, which makes sense. Move beyond the CLL. And the particular clinician that I had discussed this with was a breast cancer specialist. And so we started looking at clinicians here in the US who had been implementing this for stage 1 breast cancer. And sure enough, we saw the same pattern, right? In fact, here we see an even larger uptick in 2020. So we're expecting 2021 to be even greater than that. So again, this kind of, shows the utility of this protocol. It's very simple, and yet has these kind of very, positive, wide-ranging effects. And as we see, it's being implemented, now, not only in the US, but in other various parts of the world. So our latest research has taken kind of a different direction. We're still focused on oncology, and in 2021 published a paper on self-dividing micelles. And we basically took a fatty acid-like material called decomaltoside and added an amino acid, histidine, L-histidine, and actually found when we heated it and dehydrated, condensed it a bit, that polymers, right, polypeptides of polyhistidine started to form. And the picture in the upper left-hand corner really depicts the fatty acid and amino acid micelles. When we introduced a nucleic acid, okay, AMP, adenosine monophosphate, okay, in the top right-hand corner, that's where we started to see division, okay, as we see in the next couple of, in the lower left and right-hand corners, we started seeing the spontaneous division of these micelles. And I believe the full recording is still up on YouTube that I give the URL for here. But of course, this, again, kind of lent itself now to what we're pursuing at this point, is the development of these self-dividing micelles, possibly, right, as well as vesicles, because liposome therapy is typically used quite a bit in oncology. Well, here we have the added advantage of self-dividing liposomes, right? We could potentially deliver and distribute these anti-neoplastic chemotherapeutic agents over a much wider range, right, throughout particularly solid tumors. So the monolayer micelles could deliver and distribute the lipophilic agents, right? While bilayer liposomes, because we saw the same thing happening with both. We saw this self-division with both, the monolayer micelles and bilayer liposomes, right? With your glycerophospholipids. And same thing, right? These could, the bilayer liposomes could deliver and distribute hydrophilic chemotherapeutic agents. Now, one interesting thing that occurred when we started seeing this division upon the addition of the AMP, right, the nucleic acid, when we ran mass spec on it, we saw that what was happening were that we started getting triplets, right, trimers, if you will, of adenosine, right, AMP. For some reason, it preferred the triplets. And so, of course, in our minds, this kind of triggered, codons, right, in the genetic code. So said, wait a minute, at this time, at that point in time, actually the mRNA vaccines hadn't even come out yet. They were just beginning to come out. But it occurred to us at that point, wait a minute, what about using this mRNA technology? They are currently, looking at it as far as cancer vaccines. You could possibly use it in conjunction with the self-dividing micelles, right, and the vesicles to deliver and distribute stop mRNA codons. In other words, how now we use, we put in the code for the spike proteins. Well, what if we just put in all stop codons and injected those into solid tumors? That would be taken up, and the tumor cells would no longer be producing protein, right, and would die off. So that's kind of where we're at now. We're looking into this aspect of it. We actually have a proposal out to AstraZeneca at this point, waiting to hear back from them on the possibility of advancing this mRNA cancer vaccine using the idea of mRNA codons that code only for the stop codons, right, for proteins. So you would stop protein synthesis kind of, dead in its tracks, if you will. And so that really, brings me to the end of the presentation. We want to send out a special thanks to our initial patient, right, for her participation in the case study. It really started here in Winchester, Virginia, at Shenandoah Oncology, part of the Valley Health System. As I said, since then it's spread out, then into West Virginia, where I teach, to West Virginia University Health System. And as I said, really, has taken off across the country and is starting to be seen around the world as well. And I'd also like to thank all of you for your time and your attention and your participation. Here are a list of my references, and any questions that anyone might have, I'll definitely feel free to field here. Thank you.